The envelope that would change my life arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were when I watered Grammy's bear. Not that he needed watering, being stuffed with polyester and memories, but it was our ritual. I'd dust him off, straighten his little hand-stitched bow tie, and make sure his sign was properly displayed. Smile, the day is just beginning. Grammy had sewn that bear during her final months, her arthritic fingers somehow still nimble enough to create something beautiful. "For when I'm gone, Jeremy," she'd said, "so you'll remember to smile." At 38, I wasn't exactly the target demographic for plush toys. But this wasn't just any stuffed animal. This was Grammy's last gift, and at 3 feet tall with a weatherproof coating, he made the perfect greeter on my otherwise unremarkable front porch in the Pleasant Pines subdivision of Mapleton, Massachusetts. I'd named him Bernard, and for 6 blissful days, he'd brought smiles to mail carriers, delivery people, and the occasional brave neighbor willing to defy the unspoken subdivision rule of keeping to oneself. Then came the envelope. I was animation storyboarding that morning. My latest freelance gig involved anthropomorphic forest creatures teaching children about recycling. When the doorbell rang, nobody ever rang my doorbell at 10:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. I peered through the peephole to find no one there, but when I cracked open the door, I spotted an official-looking envelope taped to Bernard's paw. "What have they done to you, buddy?" I muttered, rescuing the envelope from his clutches. The letter inside bore the gold-embossed insignia of the Pleasant Pines Homeowners Association. I scanned the contents with growing disbelief. According to this official notice, I was in violation of something called Pleasant Pines HOA Covenant Section 7.3.1b, apparently recently amended to prohibit anthropomorphic soft-textured objects exceeding 0.6 meters in height in visible exterior areas. In plain English, they were fining me for having a teddy bear on my porch. And not just any fine, a financial penalty of $400,000 due within 7 business days. The letter threatened property lien proceedings and additional daily penalties of $1,000 if I failed to comply. It was signed by Sheila Hart, HOA board president. I read it 3 times, waiting for the punchline. $400,000? For a teddy bear? That was more than half the value of my house. It had to be a joke, probably from that prankster Dave, 2 doors down. But the letterhead looked genuine. The signature was crisp. The paper quality suggested serious business. I called the HOA office immediately. "Pleasant Pines, HOA, this is Claire," chirped the receptionist. "Hi, Claire. This is Jeremy Holloway from 428 Sycamore. I just received this notice about a teddy bear. There has to be some mistake." "Oh, Mr. Holloway. Yes, the board flagged your violation yesterday. Let me transfer you to Mrs. Hart." The line clicked and hummed before a voice sharp as winter. Ice answered. "Sheila Hart speaking. Mrs. Hart, this is Jeremy Holloway. There must be some mistake. I've received a fine for your bear." "Yes, Mr. Holloway. The violation is quite clear. But $400,000? For a stuffed animal my grandmother made?" The board unanimously approved the new bylaw last month. The notice was in the community newsletter. I never read the newsletter. Who reads HOA newsletters? They were usually filled with passive-aggressive reminders about garage door colors and garbage can placement. I wasn't aware of any new bylaw, I managed. "Ignorance of community standards isn't a valid defense, Mr. Holloway. The amended covenant was properly filed with the county clerk, but the fine amount reflects the severity of the violation. Your bear creates an emotional disruption in our carefully curated neighborhood aesthetic. The sign it's holding could be interpreted as coercive emotional manipulation of passers-by." I nearly choked. "It says smile. The day is just beginning." Precisely. What right does a plush toy have to dictate the emotional state of our residents? What if someone is having a difficult day and does not wish to smile? Your bear is imposing unwanted positivity. This had to be surreal performance art. Or I was dreaming. I pinched myself. "Mrs. Hart, be reasonable. No court would uphold a $400,000 fine for a teddy bear. I suggest you review your HOA agreement, Mr. Holloway. By purchasing property in Pleasant Pines, you agreed to abide by all current and future covenants. The fine structure was approved by the board in accordance with our bylaws. Can I appeal this? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. You may submit a written appeal that will be reviewed at next quarter's board meeting. That would be December 15th. Until then, the violation stands, and daily penalties will accumulate if payment is not received by next Tuesday. That's good day, Mr. Holloway. The line went dead. I stood in my living room staring at Bernard through the window. His button eyes seemed to hold a somber understanding of our predicament. This was madness, complete madness. But something in Mrs. Hart's voice told me she wasn't joking. The Pleasant Pines HOA was actually trying to fine me nearly $500,000 over a stuffed bear. I spent the rest of the day in a panic-fueled research frenzy. I pulled out my HOA agreement, 64 pages of legalese I'd barely skimmed when buying the house 3 years ago. There it was, in Section 12(4). Homeowner agrees to be bound by all amendments to these covenants when properly ratified by the board. I checked the HOA website. Buried in the April newsletter PDF was a single line item. Board approves new exterior decor restrictions. Full text available upon request at the HOA office. They'd technically covered themselves. Next, I called 5 different lawyers. The responses ranged from sympathetic laughter to stunned silence, but the consensus was troubling. While the fine was excessive and likely unenforceable, fighting it would require legal representation, costing tens of thousands of dollars with no guarantee of success. HOAs wielded extraordinary power, and courts often deferred to their authority in regulating community standards. By evening, I'd moved Bernard inside and was contemplating my limited options. Pay the fine? Impossible. I didn't have $400,000 fight in court. Expensive with uncertain outcome. Remove Bernard permanently. Unthinkable. He was my last connection to Grammy. Sell my house quickly. In this market? Unlikely. Ignore the fine and face foreclosure. Career suicide. None seemed viable. As I stared at Bernard sitting forlornly in my living room, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about a teddy bear anymore. This was about power. The petty power of small-minded people enforcing arbitrary rules. It was about a system designed to crush individuality under the guise of community standards. Grammy hadn't raised me to back down from bullies, even ones armed with legal letterhead and officially stamped envelopes. You know what, Bernard? I said to the bear. I think they're afraid of you, and that gives me an idea. Bernard's button eyes gleamed in the lamplight. If Sheila Hart wanted a war over plush toys, I would give her one she'd never forget. HOA levies $400K fine against widower's memorial teddy bear. That was the headline I had hoped for when I contacted the Mapleton Gazette. What I got instead was a sympathetic pat on the shoulder from Derek Simmons, local reporter, who explained that the paper couldn't risk antagonizing the Pleasant Pines HOA, their largest advertiser. Off the record, though, Derek whispered. Sheila Hart has been running that HOA like a personal fiefdom for years. Nobody dares cross her. She got the Patels fined $30,000 last year for wind chimes. Wind chimes? I echoed. Unauthorized, auditory disturbances. The Patels moved. Everyone always moves. This was my fourth dead end. The local news wouldn't touch it. The town council claimed it was a private community matter. My HOA appeal application had mysteriously disappeared from their system twice, and my savings account still had approximately $395,000 less than I needed to pay the fine. I was running out of time and options. The deadline was in 3 days, and Sheila Hart had begun sending daily reminder notices, each one more threatening than the last. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, Bernard propped in the chair across from me like a silent companion. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister in Phoenix. How's the bear situation? Need me to wire bail money yet? I hadn't told her how serious it had become. I tapped back. Working on a solution. How's the weather out there? Then I mindlessly scrolled through social media trying to distract myself from impending financial ruin. That's when I saw it. A viral video of students at Michigan State releasing thousands of rubber ducks in their dormitory fountain to protest dining hall price increases. The administration had reversed the price hike within 48 hours. peaceful. Humorous protest, the student organizer explained in an interview. Hard to fight back against rubber ducks without looking ridiculous. Something clicked in my brain. A spark of inspiration that grew brighter as I stared at Bernard's patient expression. Bernard, I said aloud, what if we weren't alone? The plan formulated rapidly, born of desperation, caffeine, and just enough absurdist logic to seem brilliant at 1 a.m. If Sheila Hart thought one teddy bear was a threat to community standards, how would she react to an army of them? I stayed up all night building a simple website, The Bear Rebellion. I explained my situation, uploaded photos of Bernard and the ridiculous fine notice, and added a crowdfunding component with a modest goal of $5,000 for legal defense and community awareness. Then I did something I'd never done before. I made my private struggle public. I shared the website on every social platform, emailed it to friends, and even spent $200 on targeted ads to reach people interested in HOA nightmares and community rights. When I finally went to bed as dawn broke, the fundraiser had collected $328. I awoke 4 hours later to my phone buzzing continuously. Blinking away sleep, I checked the screen and nearly fell out of bed. The crowdfunding total, $47,652 and climbing. My inbox was flooded. Local news outlets wanted interviews. National blogs had picked up the story. A law professor from Harvard wanted to discuss the case pro bono. And there were hundreds, literally hundreds, of messages from people sharing their own HOA horror stories. The Bear Rebellion had struck a nerve. By that evening, I was sitting in my living room being interviewed by a crew from a Boston news channel. It's not just about Bernard, I explained, gesturing to the bear beside me. It's about the abuse of power that happens when communities surrender their autonomy to unaccountable private governance. I hadn't planned to sound like a revolutionary. I was an animator who spent most days drawing talking raccoons. But something about this fight had awakened a dormant part of me. Perhaps the part that had inherited Grammy's stubborn streak. The crowdfunding total hit $100,000 by midnight. Then came the unexpected twist that changed everything. Marjorie Winters, the celebrated performance artist known for large-scale public installations, sent me a direct message. Jeremy, your bear story is everything wrong with suburban America. I want to help. Let's make this bigger. Marjorie wasn't just any artist. She had once filled Times Square with 10,000 origami birds to protest detention centers. Her involvement would transform my small rebellion into something the media couldn't ignore. We spoke for 3 hours, plotting. By morning, the plan had evolved from simple legal defense to something far more ambitious and wonderfully absurd. The Bear Rebellion would take physical form. While my lawyer, now I had a lawyer, filed for an emergency injunction against the HOA fine, Marjorie and I set our plan in motion. The crowdfunding reached $200,000 in just 6 days. More than enough for what we needed. First came the permits. Working through Marjorie's connections, we secured approval from the city, which had jurisdiction over the main roads running through Pleasant Pines, for a community goodwill parade and festival of kindness. Next, we commissioned 20 enormous, plush bear costumes, each standing 9 feet tall and featuring friendly, non-threatening faces. We hired performers from local theater groups to wear them. Then came the masterstroke. We invited every resident of Pleasant Pines to participate by carrying their own teddy bears. The invitation carefully avoided mentioning the HOA or Sheila Hart, presenting the event as a celebration of community warmth and childlike wonder. The day before the fine was due, I received another certified letter from the HOA. This time, Sheila Hart had escalated the situation dramatically. Not only was she maintaining the original fine, but she'd added supplementary penalties. $50,000 for public disparagement of community standards, $75,000 for unauthorized solicitation of community members, and $125,000 for preparation of unapproved public event. My total obligation now stood at $650,000, due by 5 p.m. the next day. The letter also mentioned they had initiated proceedings to place a lien on my property and would pursue all available legal remedies. I taped the letter to my refrigerator as additional motivation. The next morning, D-Day for the Bear Rebellion, dawned bright and clear. Perfect parade weather. Marjorie arrived early with a production team and the first wave of volunteers. The giant bear costumes were distributed, signs were prepared, and our parade route was marked. We had alerted local media, but I wasn't prepared for the turnout. 5 television crews, dozens of journalists, and a helicopter circling overhead. At 10 a.m. I addressed the growing crowd gathered at the entrance to Pleasant Pines. "Today isn't about me or my grandmother's bear," I said, Bernard cradled in my arms. "It's about remembering that communities are made of people, not rules. It's about standing up to arbitrary power with kindness and humor. So let's be kind, let's be funny, and let's show Pleasant Pines what real community looks like." The cheer that went up sent birds scattering from nearby trees. Our parade started moving precisely at 10:30 a.m. 20 enormous plush bears leading the way, followed by hundreds of people carrying teddy bears of every size, color, and condition. Children rode on parents' shoulders, holding aloft their favorite stuffed friends. Seniors walked slowly, some with bears nearly as old as they were. Signs bobbed above the crowd. "Bears against bullies." "Hugs not fines." "Plush revolution." "Comfort is not a crime." We had a brass band playing cheerful music, and the giant bears danced, hugged bystanders, and distributed small teddy bear keychains to anyone who wanted one. The spectacle was deliberately absurd and impossible to ignore. As we approached my street, I spotted Sheila Hart standing on the sidewalk, flanked by 2 men in suits, HOA lawyers, I presumed. Her face was contorted in a mask of fury and disbelief. The look only intensified when our lead bear, the largest one named Big Buddy, spotted her and cheerfully lumbered in her direction, arms outstretched for a hug. "Stay back," she shouted, retreating several steps. "This is an unauthorized gathering. You are all trespassing on private property." A nearby reporter thrust a microphone toward her. "Mrs. Hart, can you explain why your HOA is demanding over $500,000 from a resident for displaying a teddy bear?" The cameras swiveled toward her. This was the moment Sheila Hart's carefully constructed persona collapsed. On live television, she snapped, "That thing is a deliberate provocation. It mocks our standards. We have the absolute right to determine what belongs in our community, and we have determined that anthropomorphic childish objects have no place in a sophisticated adult development." The reporter raised an eyebrow. "So you're officially against teddy bears?" "I am against chaos," she sputtered. "Look at this circus. This is exactly what our regulations are designed to prevent. Next it will be lawn flamingos and garden gnomes and anarchy." One of her lawyers tugged at her sleeve, whispering urgently, but Sheila was beyond restraint. "Do you know what happens when you allow one bear? Everyone wants a bear. Then they want different colored houses and personalized mailboxes. And before you know it, property values collapse." The crowd had stopped to watch this meltdown, hundreds of teddy bears facing Sheila Hart in silent judgment. "Mrs. Hart," the reporter pressed, "are you suggesting that teddy bears cause economic downturns?" That's when she made her fatal mistake. I have protected this community for 15 years. I have personally sacrificed to maintain our standards. The fines pay for our community improvements, our spa weekends, our... She caught herself, but too late. The lawyer now physically pulled her away from the microphones, but the damage was done. "What spa weekends would those be, Mrs. Hart?" called the reporter. The parade continued past her house, leaving Sheila Hart and her lawyers to retreat inside, while the cameras followed their hasty exit. By afternoon, the Festival of Kindness was in full swing at the community park. Hundreds of people, many from surrounding towns, had joined the celebration. We had teddy bear picnics, build-your-own bear stations, and a bear repair hospital where children could bring their worn stuffed friends for mending. Local businesses, sensing an opportunity, arrived with food trucks and bear-themed merchandise. The mayor, up for re-election and never one to miss a popular photo opportunity, declared it Community Spirit Day and presented me with a certificate of appreciation. I was conducting an interview with a national morning show when my lawyer fought through the crowd to reach me. "Jeremy, the judge granted our emergency injunction. The HOA can't collect any fines or place a lien pending a full hearing." The cheer that went up around us was deafening. But the real bombshell dropped that evening when a former HOA board member, emboldened by the day's events, provided financial records to reporters showing that over $1.2 million in HOA fines had been funneled into a board discretionary fund that primarily paid for Sheila Hart's luxury trips, spa treatments, and jewelry. The investigation was opened the next day. The reckoning came swiftly. Within 48 hours of the Bear Rebellion parade, the county prosecutor announced an investigation into the Pleasant Pines HOA's financial practices. By week's end, 3 board members had resigned, and the management company that administered the HOA had terminated its contract, citing irreconcilable community relations issues. Sheila Hart, however, refused to step down. She barricaded herself in the HOA office and issued a series of increasingly unhinged community bulletins. In her latest emergency notice, she claimed the community was under attack from anarchists and property value terrorists. She declared that the board remained committed to defending their standards against what she called plush insurrectionists and their media accomplices. Most absurdly, she announced that effective immediately, all exterior decorations, including American flags, holiday lights, and even plant pots, must be removed pending board inspection and approval. Non-compliance would result in maximum penalties. She finished by declaring they would not surrender to Bear sympathizers. That bulletin, especially the ban on American flags, caught the attention of a popular cable news host who devoted a 15-minute segment to HOA Gone Wild, the teddy bear tyrant of Massachusetts. The story went national overnight. Meanwhile, something remarkable was happening in Pleasant Pines. Neighbors who had never spoken were introducing themselves. Residents brought chairs onto their front lawns, a previous HOA violation, to chat with passers-by. Small teddy bears began appearing in windows throughout the subdivision, a silent symbol of solidarity. The community I'd barely known for 3 years suddenly felt like a neighborhood. A week after the parade, a special community meeting was called at the local elementary school. The turnout was unprecedented. Over 90% of Pleasant Pines homeowners packed the gymnasium. The acting HOA board chair, the only member who hadn't resigned, called for order. In light of recent events and the unusual circumstances facing our association, we've called this emergency meeting to address community concerns. "Where's Sheila?" someone shouted. Mrs. Hart was invited but declined to attend, the chair replied carefully. What followed was 3 hours of catharsis as neighbor after neighbor approached the microphone to share their HOA horror stories. The elderly widower fined $200 daily for a ramp installed for his wheelchair. The young couple penalized for a bird feeder visible from the street. The veteran ordered to remove wind chimes that helped with his PTSD. The single mother whose permission to install solar panels was denied 6 times without explanation. Each story revealed a pattern of selective enforcement, excessive fines, and personal vendettas, all orchestrated by Sheila Hart and rubber-stamped by her hand-picked board. When I took the microphone, I kept it simple. I just wanted my grandmother's bear to make people smile. I never expected to uncover all of this. But now that we have, we need to decide what kind of community we want to be. The motion to dissolve the current HOA and elect an entirely new board passed 178-3. The 3 opposing votes were suspected to be Sheila Hart voting by proxy through distant relatives. The new board's first resolution: a complete audit of HOA finances by an independent firm. The results were staggering. Over 15 years, Sheila Hart had collected more than $4.3 million in homeowner fines. Less than 20% had gone toward actual community improvements. The rest had funded 27 board retreats at luxury resorts, a $175,000 office renovation for the HOA headquarters, primarily Sheila's private office, consulting fees paid to a company owned by Sheila's sister Designer Clothing, and jewelry classified as professional attire for community representation. The district attorney's office announced criminal charges 2 days later. Sheila Hart's reign was over. When she was finally escorted from the HOA office, boxes of personal items in hand, reporters swarming, she spotted me watching from across the street. Bernard tucked under my arm. For a moment our eyes met. I expected anger, perhaps a final threat. Instead, I saw something unexpected. Fear. Not of legal consequences, but of irrelevance. Sheila Hart had built her identity around controlling our community. Without that power, who was she? I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The following weekend, we held a community cleanup day, the first ever organized by residents rather than the HOA. Neighbors painted fences, planted flowers, and helped each other with repairs that had been put off for fear of violating some obscure regulation. Bernard sat on my porch, overseeing the activity, his sign slightly modified. "Smile, a new day has begun." The final victory came a month later. The newly elected HOA board, which now included me as Community Relations Director, voted unanimously to adopt a new covenant with two key provisions. No fine could exceed $100 without majority community approval. Bernard Clause, explicitly protecting the right of residents to display items of personal, cultural, or sentimental significance. At the meeting where these changes were ratified, the board presented me with a small bronze plaque to place beside Bernard. Here sits Bernard, who reminded us that communities are built with heart, not rules. It wasn't the end of all HOA problems, of course. There were still debates about paint colors and lawn maintenance, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Regulations were now seen as minimal guidelines for mutual respect rather than weapons of control. As for Sheila Hart, she pleaded guilty to misappropriation of funds and received 5 years probation plus restitution. She sold her house and moved to Florida, perhaps to terrorize a new community with her clipboard and rulebook. The crowdfunding money that hadn't been used for legal defense or the parade was donated to establish the Community Spirit Fund, providing grants to help residents with home repairs and improvements. 1 year to the day after the original fine arrived, Mapleton officially recognized Bear Day with a smaller but equally joyful parade. The tradition continues annually, a reminder that sometimes the softest things can stand against the hardest hearts and win. Bernard still sits on my porch every day, greeting passers-by with his simple message of optimism. Sometimes, when the light hits just right, I swear I can see Grammy smiling through his button eyes, proud that her final gift taught an entire community what it means to stand up for what matters. In the end, it wasn't really about a teddy bear. It was about remembering that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. And that even in the most controlled spaces, there's always room for a little softness, a little rebellion, and a little bear-sized courage. After all, as Grammy used to say, sometimes the biggest victories come from the smallest stands. Jeremy Holloway.